George Knapp grew up in Southern California and studied journalism at California State University, Long Beach. He started his broadcasting career in the early 1980s at KLAS-TV in Las Vegas, the CBS affiliate that would become his professional home for most of his career. His early work was conventional local news, city council meetings, crime reports, the daily material of regional television journalism. Nothing in his background suggested he would spend the next 4 decades investigating subjects that most journalists refuse to touch. The shift happened in 1989 when a man named Bob Lazar contacted him through an intermediary. Lazar claimed to have worked at a classified facility near the Nevada test site, a location he called S4, roughly 15 miles south of the main Area 51 complex at Groom Lake. He said his job there had been to study the propulsion systems of recovered craft of non-human origin. He described 9 disc-shaped vehicles stored in individual hangars carved into a hillside. He described the propulsion technology as gravity wave generation using a stable isotope of element 115, then unknown to conventional science. He described briefing documents that claimed the vehicles had originated from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Lazar was not reaching out to confess or seek absolution. He said he was afraid. He said people had been following him. He said he wanted the information in the public domain so that any attempt to silence him would be pointless. Knapp spent months trying to verify what he could before airing anything. What he found was a mixed picture that he has described consistently over 30 years. Some details checked out. Los Alamos National Laboratory initially denied having any record of Lazar's employment. When Knapp pressed, a Los Alamos phone directory from the relevant period was located with Lazar's name in it. A W-2 tax document surfaced showing income from the Department of Naval Intelligence connected to the Groom Lake facility. A woman named Jean Huff, who had known Lazar before the public story broke, confirmed specific details about his claims that she had heard from him privately before they could have been constructed in response to public events. Other details could not be verified. Lazar's claimed educational credentials, master's degrees from MIT and Caltech, could not be confirmed through those institutions. His description of the facilities, the vehicles, and the propulsion technology remained his account alone. Knapp made a judgment call that he has defended ever since. The corroborating details were specific enough, and Lazar's demeanor was consistent enough across multiple separate interviews that the core of the account deserved public attention. He aired it in November 1989. The story attracted significant attention and significant dismissal in roughly equal measure. Lazar has maintained his account without significant modification for 35 years. The details that could be checked have largely held up. The details that cannot be checked remain unverified. That is where the case stands. The broader landscape of Knapp's work extends far beyond the Lazar case, and the Lazar case is sometimes treated as more central to his contribution than it actually is. His more sustained and arguably more significant work involves the documentation of what the government actually does, institutionally, programmatically over time, regarding anomalous phenomena. This documentation is less dramatic than alien propulsion systems, but is grounded in a more accessible evidentiary record. The history of official government engagement with UAP phenomena is documented in declassified records going back to the 1940s. Project Sign, established by the Air Force in 1947, in the immediate aftermath of the Kenneth Arnold sighting and the Roswell incident, was the first formal military study of flying disc reports. It operated under the direction of Air Technical Intelligence Command and produced in 1948 a classified assessment known as the Estimate of the Situation. The estimate, according to officials who saw it before its destruction was ordered, concluded that the most credible reports were best explained by extraterrestrial origin. Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg rejected this conclusion and ordered the document destroyed. Most copies were. A small number of references to its content survived in other documents and in the recollections of officers who read it. Project Grudge replaced Sign in 1949. The mission had effectively reversed. Where Sign had been tasked with understanding the phenomena, Grudge was tasked with explaining them away. Its final report, issued in 1949, concluded that UFO sightings were attributable to misidentifications, hoaxes, and psychological factors. The classified appendices to this report, partially declassified decades later, tell a different story. They contain case analyses that the public summary ignores. Project Blue Book ran from 1952 to 1969, the longest and most visible of the official programs. Its files contain approximately 12,618 reported sightings, of which 701 remain classified as unidentified, meaning no conventional explanation was found that satisfied the investigators at the time. The Condon Report, produced by the University of Colorado under contract to the Air Force and published in 1969, provided the institutional cover for closing Blue Book. The report concluded that further scientific study of UFOs was unwarranted. It has been extensively criticized since by scientists who reviewed it on publication, by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which issued a dissenting analysis, and by subsequent researchers who documented that the report's conclusions did not follow from its own data. Roughly 30% of the cases Condon examined were classified as unexplained, a proportion his conclusion that nothing of scientific value has come from UFO study does not reflect. Blue Book closed in December 1969. The official position since then has been that the government has no interest in UFOs and conducts no ongoing research. This position was false at the time it was established and has been false ever since. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program is the most thoroughly documented of the classified programs that operated after Blue Book's closure. AATIP ran from 2007 to 2012 under a black budget allocation of approximately $22 million per year, administered through the Defense Intelligence Agency and contracted primarily to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, Robert Bigelow's research company. The program's existence was confirmed by the Department of Defense following a December 2017 New York Times story co-authored by Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean. The program's director was Luis Elizondo, an intelligence officer who had spent his career in counterintelligence. He resigned in October 2017, a month before the Times story, writing a resignation letter to Secretary of Defense James Mattis that described institutional resistance to taking the program's findings seriously as his reason for leaving. Elizondo's resignation letter is a matter of public record. It states that despite his best efforts, AATIP's findings were being stonewalled by senior officials who treated the subject as beneath serious attention. He describes this as a national security failure. The 3 videos released in conjunction with the 2017 disclosure, FLIR-1, Gimbal, and Go Fast, show Navy F/A-18 aircraft tracking unidentified aerial objects. The videos were authenticated by the Department of Defense as genuine recordings from military sensor systems. The objects in them exhibit flight characteristics that the pilots in the videos and in subsequent interviews describe as inconsistent with any known technology. One appears to rotate against the wind at altitude, another moves without apparent propulsion, a third reaches speeds inconsistent with its apparent size. These authenticated videos are the strongest publicly available physical evidence that unexplained aerial phenomena are real and documented by military systems. Christopher Mellon served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence during the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. He has a law degree from Yale and a distinguished record in national security policy. He is not a fringe figure. He has said publicly, in multiple interviews and congressional submissions, that the United States government has collected extensive evidence of unexplained aerial phenomena that has not been shared with the public or with most of Congress. He has described a bureaucratic culture in which evidence of genuine anomalies is collected, classified, and then effectively buried because no institutional framework exists for dealing with findings that do not fit established categories. Mellon's account of the specific failure mode is worth quoting in substance. He has described cases in which military pilots reported UAP encounters through official channels. The encounters were recorded by multiple sensor systems, and the resulting data was classified and filed without triggering any investigation. The data exists. The investigation was never conducted. The classification prevented the information from reaching anyone with the authority or inclination to act on it. He has described this as a systemic problem, not the result of deliberate concealment by any individual, but of institutional architecture that routes anomalous findings into classification where no one is responsible for following up on them. This is a specific, credible description of how the institutional management of this subject works at the operational level. It is more useful than vague claims about what classified archives contain. Luis Elizondo's account of what AATIP found has been shared in fragments across dozens of interviews over 6 years. The overall picture he presents is consistent. The program found that unexplained aerial phenomena are real, occur regularly in restricted military airspace, and exhibit capabilities that no known human technology can account for. The phenomena have been tracked by military radar, recorded by aircraft sensor systems, and observed by trained military pilots in conditions that minimize the possibility of misidentification. He describes 5 specific performance characteristics that the collected evidence documents: instantaneous acceleration without apparent propulsion, hypersonic velocity without heat signatures, low observability, the ability to evade radar in ways that known stealth technology does not fully account for, transmedium travel, movement through air, water and space without apparent transition costs, and positive lift without conventional aerodynamic surfaces. These characteristics, if accurate, describe technology substantially beyond anything publicly known. Elizondo has been careful to say, if accurate. He presents them as what the evidence suggests, not as established engineering specifications. He has also been clear about what UAP did not establish. The program did not determine the origin of the phenomena. It did not identify the operators or manufacturers of the craft, if they are craft in any conventional sense. It did not reach conclusions about intent or purpose. It accumulated evidence of anomalous phenomena without solving the underlying questions. The congressional hearings on UAPs in July 2023 added significant testimony to the public record. David Grush, a former Air Force intelligence officer who had served as the National Reconnaissance Office's representative to the UAP task force, testified before the House Oversight Committee under oath. His testimony made claims that substantially exceeded what Elizondo and Mellon had said publicly. Grush testified that he had been informed through official channels and through direct access to classified programs that the United States government has been in possession of craft of non-human origin and biological specimens of non-human origin for decades. He said the programs involved had been operating outside normal congressional oversight through a network of private contractors under highly compartmentalized classification structures. He said he had filed formal whistleblower complaints with the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community and with Congress, and that his complaints had been assessed as credible and urgent. Two former Navy pilots, David Fravor and Ryan Graves, also testified. Fravor had been the flight leader during the 2004 USS Nimitz encounter, the incident that produced the FLIR-1 video. He described his visual observation of an object exhibiting performance characteristics he had never seen in 20 years of military aviation. Graves described encounters that he and his squadron had with unidentified objects on a regular basis during 2014 and 2015 over the Virginia coast, and described the Navy's initial response as indifferent. Fravor's testimony is among the most credible in the public record on this subject. He is a career military officer with an exemplary record. His visual observation during the Nimitz incident is corroborated by multiple other witnesses, by ship radar, and by the FLIR-1 video. His description of what he saw is detailed, specific, and has been consistent across every interview he has given. His account does not tell us what the object was. It tells us what he observed, an object that moved in ways he had no explanation for, that seemed aware of his aircraft, and that departed at a speed he could not estimate because it simply stopped being visible. The question of what George Knapp actually knows, as opposed to what he has been told and what he has been able to verify, is worth addressing honestly. He has spent 35 years developing sources inside the defense and intelligence communities. His track record on specific verifiable claims is good. The Lazar employment confirmation, the AATIP disclosure, the documentation of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. These are cases where his reporting held up. His sources have also told him things he cannot verify from the outside. Things about the content of classified programs, about the nature of retrieved materials, about what senior officials have been briefed on. He holds these differently from the verifiable claims. He attributes them to sources. He qualifies them appropriately. What he has said publicly about the scope of the classified findings, that they substantially exceed what has been disclosed, that the 3 released videos are a fraction of the available evidence, that people with relevant clearances have told him the findings are more significant than anything in the public record, is consistently qualified as what he has been told, not as what he has documented. That distinction matters. His verifiable reporting is solid. His source-reported claims about classified content are credible, given his track record and his source network, but they cannot be independently confirmed. Both are worth knowing about, held at appropriate levels of confidence. The witnesses that Knapp has interviewed and documented over his career represent a specific category of evidence that is easy to undervalue. People who have had encounters with anomalous phenomena, pilots, ranchers, military personnel, ordinary people in ordinary circumstances, often have no one to report to. The official channels that should exist for this purpose either don't exist or are structured to discourage reporting. The social consequences of reporting are real. The professional consequences for military and aviation personnel have historically been significant. Knapp has been, for many of these people, the first serious journalist who would hear them out, who would spend the time to interview them properly, probe for inconsistencies, look for corroboration, and report their accounts honestly. This function, providing a serious journalistic venue for witness accounts that have no other home, is a real contribution to the public record. It has accumulated over 35 years into a body of documented testimony that is more carefully assembled than anything else available on these subjects. The testimony is not proof of specific explanations. Witness testimony, even from credible witnesses, cannot establish what the phenomena ultimately are, but it establishes that the phenomena occur, that real people in real situations encounter things that their existing frameworks cannot account for, at a documented scale that the institutional record does not reflect. One case worth noting specifically, the USS Nimitz encounter in November 2004. The encounter involved not just David Fravor, but multiple pilots from Strike Fighter Squadron 41. The radar crew aboard the USS Princeton, which tracked the object for 2 weeks before the visual encounter, and sensor operators whose recordings produced the FLIR-1 video. The Princeton's radar operators had been tracking a group of objects descending from above 80,000 feet to hover at approximately 50 feet above the Pacific Ocean, before departing at high speed. This had been occurring daily for 2 weeks before the scramble was ordered. Senior radar operator Kevin Day filed reports on the contacts throughout this period. The contacts were real, tracked by the Princeton's SPY-1 radar, not reported by a single observer. When Fravor's flight was scrambled on November 14th, they were directed to a position approximately 60 miles off the California coast. What Fravor and his wingman saw was an object approximately 40 feet long, white, shaped roughly like a tic-tac, hovering above a roiling disturbance on the ocean's surface. It had no wings, no tail, no visible propulsion. When Fravor descended toward it in a spiral, the object mirrored his descent, matching his movement before departing at a speed he described as gone, instantaneous in practical terms. A second flight arrived at the location minutes later and found nothing. except that the airborne radar operator, Chad Underwood, acquired the object on his sensor system, the recording that became the FLIR-1 video. The object was demonstrating what Underwood described as impossible behavior for any known aircraft, appearing to orient against the wind and to react to his radar lock in ways he had never seen in years of weapon systems operation. Multiple independent observers, multiple sensor systems, 2 weeks of prior contacts, all consistent with each other. This is the evidentiary quality that the best UAP cases in the public record represent. Not a single witness with a single observation. A sustained, multiply-documented encounter with consistent observations across independent sources. The Nimitz case does not tell us what the object was. It establishes that the object, whatever it was real and exhibited characteristics that no current public domain technology accounts for. Before closing this episode, it is worth assessing honestly what 35 years of George Knapp's work has contributed to public knowledge. He helped bring the AATIP program into public view. This is documented and significant. It changed the public record in a meaningful way and established that the government's claimed disinterest in UAPs was inconsistent with its classified activity. He documented the Skinwalker Ranch investigation at a level of journalistic care that most paranormal coverage does not achieve, producing a record that separates genuine anomalies from speculation more clearly than most comparable work. He maintained, across decades, a consistent standard of source attribution and appropriate qualification that distinguishes his work from the more credulous end of the field. He provided documentation and serious attention to witnesses who had no other avenue, people like David Fravor, whose account of the Nimitz encounter went largely unremarked until Knapp and others gave it the attention it warranted. These are real contributions. They have improved the public record on subjects that the mainstream press treats as beneath serious coverage. What his work has not resolved is the underlying question of what the phenomena are. That question was open when he started in 1989. It is open now. The evidence is more extensive and better documented. The explanation remains absent. That is the honest state of the subject after 35 years of the best journalism it has received. The phenomena are real. They are documented by serious people using serious methodology. The explanation for what they are has not been established. The investigation continues, with the patient accumulation of evidence that genuine investigation requires, and the honest acknowledgement that more documentation by itself does not produce resolution. Only better methodology and eventually access to the classified record that has been managed out of public view for 7 decades will do that. That access has not come. The work continues without it, as it has for 35 years. The O'Hare Airport incident of November 7, 2006 is one of the most credible daylight UAP cases in the modern record because of the number and professional quality of its witnesses. At approximately 4:15 in the afternoon, a group of United Airlines employees at Chicago O'Hare International Airport observed a disc-shaped object hovering silently over Gate C-17. The witnesses included ramp workers, mechanics, and a pilot who observed the object before departure. Their estimates on the object's altitude ranged from 1,500 to 2,000 feet. The object was described as dark gray, metallic in appearance, and perfectly still despite wind conditions at the time. After approximately 2 minutes, the object accelerated straight up through the overcast cloud layer, leaving a circular hole in the clouds that persisted for several minutes before closing. The Federal Aviation Administration was contacted and acknowledged receiving a report. United Airlines initially denied any reports had been made by their employees. Knapp and investigative journalist John Hilkovich at the Chicago Tribune independently obtained FAA communications through FOIA requests showing that the agency had received the report and that Chicago Approach Control had discussed the object on recorded radio. United Airlines subsequently acknowledged that employees had filed reports. The FAA did not investigate. Its official position was that the object was a weather phenomenon. The witnesses were not anonymous. They were identified aviation professionals who risked professional embarrassment to report what they had seen. Their accounts were independently collected and were consistent in their core details. What the O'Hare incident documents: a structured aerial object observed at close range in good conditions by multiple credible witnesses at one of the busiest airports in the world. The departure through cloud cover, leaving a visible hole, is the detail that most distinguishes it from conventional misidentification. That specific behavior is not produced by any known natural weather phenomenon. What it does not establish: what the object was, where it came from, or who operated it. The Rendlesham Forest incident of December 1980 is the most thoroughly documented UAP case in British history and one of the most credible in the global record. The incident occurred over 2 nights at the end of December 1980 in Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, between the twin NATO air bases of RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Both bases were at the time operated by the United States Air Force. On the night of December 26th, security personnel at RAF Woodbridge reported unusual lights in the forest. A patrol was dispatched. Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman John Burrows approached a structured craft that had landed in a clearing. Peniston described touching the craft's surface and feeling symbols carved or inscribed into it. He made drawings in his notebook at the time. Both men reported the craft subsequently departed. On the night of December 28th, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt led a larger investigation into the forest, bringing radiation detection equipment. The audio recording Holt made during this investigation is in the public record. On the recording, his team documents finding landing traces, measuring radiation levels elevated above background at the landing site, and then observing lights in the sky that Holt describes on the recording in real time. Lights that moved, that responded to his team's flashlights, and that sent down beams of light near the base. Holt subsequently wrote a memorandum to the British Ministry of Defence documenting the incidents. The memorandum was obtained under FOIA by researcher Robert Todd in 1983. Its existence confirmed that a senior USAF officer considered the incidents significant enough to report to British authorities. Holt has spoken publicly about the incident for decades. His account has been consistent. He has described being frustrated that the incidents were not taken seriously by either the US or UK authorities. The Rendlesham incident is not without contested elements. Some witness accounts have shifted over the decades, and the specific interpretation of what the landing site traces represent has been debated. But the core evidence, Holt's contemporaneous audio recording, his memorandum, and the consistent accounts of multiple military personnel, represents a body of documentation that genuine misidentification has difficulty accounting for. The Tehran incident of September 19, 1976, is significant because it produced two attempted military intercepts that were documented in a Defense Intelligence Agency report later obtained through FOIA. Iranian Air Force General Parviz Jafari, then a major, was scrambled from Shahrokhi Air Force Base to investigate bright lights over Tehran reported by civilian observers and the control tower. His F-4 Phantom intercepted the object, which he described as radiating brilliant light in alternating colors. When he attempted to arm his weapons system for an engagement, his instrumentation failed. As soon as he turned away from the object, the instrumentation returned to normal. He attempted a second weapons lock. The instrumentation failed again. A second object detached from the first and approached his aircraft at high speed. He prepared to eject. The object stopped before reaching him and then returned to the primary object. The DIA report on this incident, classified at the time and obtained years later, assessed the incident as a credible one, with multiple witnesses, radar confirmation, and airworthiness and repercussions in the field of electronic jamming. The report recommended the case be considered as a classic, which meets all the criteria for a legitimate UAP report. The Iranian military officer involved has spoken publicly about the incident. The DIA document is in the public record. What the Tehran case documents: an attempted military intercept of an unidentified object, documented interference with aircraft weapons systems, consistent with what Elizondo has described as the phenomena's apparent ability to affect electronic systems. The JAL Flight 1628 incident of November 17, 1986, is documented by Federal Aviation Administration radar and by the testimony of Captain Kenju Terauchi, a senior Japan Airlines pilot with 29 years of experience. Terauchi was commanding a cargo flight from Paris to Tokyo, overflying Alaska at approximately 35,000 feet. He and his crew observed a large object that paced their aircraft for approximately 50 minutes over the Alaskan interior. Terauchi estimated the object as larger than 2 aircraft carriers. The object was tracked by FAA radar at Anchorage Center and by military radar. The FAA tape recordings of the communications between Terauchi's flight and ground control were preserved and document the real-time reporting of the encounter. The FAA investigated the incident. Its chief investigator, John Callahan, later testified that he had briefed CIA officials on the findings and was told by those officials that the meeting never happened and that the incident should not be discussed publicly. Callahan's account, given in various forums over the years, describes being directly told by government officials to suppress information about a radar-confirmed aerial encounter. He has kept the original FAA briefing materials from the incident and has made them available to researchers. The JAL 1628 case is significant not just for the encounter itself, a radar-confirmed object tracking a commercial aircraft for nearly an hour over restricted Alaskan airspace, but for Callahan's testimony about the official response to it. The pattern across these cases is worth identifying specifically because it is more useful than general claims about institutional behavior. In each case, the encounter is documented by multiple independent sources. Sensor systems, radar, aircraft instrumentation, thermal imaging confirm the observations of human witnesses. Official investigations acknowledge the reports and then produce findings that do not reflect the evidence. Individuals who attempt to follow up are discouraged or told the events did not occur. This pattern is consistent across cases spanning 4 decades and multiple countries. The O'Hare incident, Rendlesham, Tehran, JAL 1628, and the Nimitz case all show variations of the same institutional response. The consistent response does not establish what the phenomena are. It does establish that the institutional management of this evidence has been deliberate and consistent across a long period. That is what Knapp's journalism has documented most thoroughly, not the specific nature of the phenomena, the specific character of how they are officially handled when they are reported. The handling is distinctive, it has been consistent, and it raises a question that genuine investigation requires asking: why has the response to well-documented, multiply-confirmed, unusual aerial encounters been systematic dismissal rather than systematic investigation? The answer to that question is not established by the available evidence. Several possibilities are consistent with the documented pattern. The honest investigator holds them open, rather than defaulting to the most dramatic one. But the question is legitimate. The pattern that generates it is real, and the people who have asked it most persistently, Knapp among them, have contributed something real to the public record by simply refusing to accept that documented evidence should be met with institutional silence. The relationship between Knapp's work on UAPs and the Skinwalker Ranch investigation is worth understanding clearly, because the two are sometimes treated as parts of the same story when they are actually distinct contributions. The UAP journalism is grounded in multiple independent documented cases: the Nimitz encounter, Rendlesham, Tehran, O'Hare, and dozens of others, where the core evidence is confirmed by sensor systems and multiple witnesses. It is the strongest part of the public record on anomalous aerial phenomena. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation is a single location with a documented but different kind of evidence base: physical anomalies in tissue samples and soil, witness accounts of multiple categories of unusual events, and a monitoring gap pattern that Kelleher documented carefully. It is real evidence, but of a different and generally weaker quality than sensor-confirmed military encounter data. Treating these as equivalent evidence for a unified narrative, the government knows what is at Skinwalker Ranch because it knows what is in the sky, is a step that the evidence does not actually support. What both bodies of evidence share is genuine anomaly status, findings that existing conventional frameworks do not fully account for. What they do not share is evidentiary quality. The multiply-confirmed military UAP encounters are stronger evidence than any single location anomaly study. That distinction is worth maintaining. It affects what conclusions the evidence can actually support. George Knapp is still working. He has described in recent interviews what he believes the trajectory of UAP disclosure looks like from his current vantage point. He believes the 2017 disclosure and the 2023 congressional testimony represent a real shift, that the subject can no longer be officially dismissed in the way it was for decades. He does not believe comprehensive transparency is imminent. The institutional architecture that has managed this information for 7 decades does not dismantle quickly. The specific programs Grush described, if they exist as he described them, are protected by multiple layers of classification and contractor confidentiality that will not yield to congressional requests alone. But he believes the direction has changed, that the combination of authenticated video evidence, credible official testimony, and sustained congressional attention has moved the subject from active dismissal to something more like uneasy acknowledgement. Whether that acknowledgement will produce the systematic investigation and public disclosure that the evidence warrants is genuinely unknown. What is known is that the evidence is better documented, more credibly testified to, and more officially acknowledged than at any previous point in the modern era of this subject. That is real progress, measured against where the subject stood in 1989 when Knapp first aired the Lazar story. It is not resolution. The underlying questions about what these phenomena are, where they come from, and what the government has found in its classified investigations remain open. The investigation continues. That is the honest place for this episode to end. The civilian research community that has worked alongside Knapp's journalism over the decades has produced its own body of documented cases. Some of this work is rigorous, some is not. Understanding the difference is part of engaging honestly with the field. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, has been collecting UAP reports since 1969. Its database contains hundreds of thousands of cases. The quality of individual reports varies enormously, from detailed corroborated accounts with physical evidence to single witness observations with no supporting data. MUFON's methodology has improved over time, but remains inconsistent. Its data is valuable as a broad collection, but requires careful case-by-case evaluation rather than aggregate statistical treatment. The Center for UFO Studies, founded by astronomer J. Allen Hynek in 1973, applied more rigorous evaluation criteria. Hynek had served as the scientific consultant to Project Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book, and had spent those years as a skeptic developing explanations for sightings. His direct exposure to the Project Blue Book data, including cases he could not explain, shifted his position significantly. He developed the classification system, close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. That is now standard terminology. His subsequent civilian research prioritized cases with multiple independent witnesses and physical evidence. Hynek's contribution to the field was methodological as much as documentary. He demonstrated that rigorous case evaluation could identify a core of genuinely anomalous reports that resisted conventional explanation. His book, The UFO Experience, published in 1972, remains a methodologically careful treatment of the evidence. His work and Knapp's journalism come from different starting points. Hynek was a scientist applying scientific methodology, Knapp, a journalist applying journalistic methodology, but they converge on similar conclusions. A core of genuinely anomalous cases exists that conventional explanations do not account for. Those cases deserve serious investigation. They have not received it at the institutional level. The pattern of witness treatment across the documented cases is consistent enough to be identified as a systemic issue rather than a series of individual incidents. Military pilots who report UAP encounters face a specific institutional dilemma. The aviation safety framework theoretically creates an obligation to report unusual events that might affect flight safety. The cultural framework within military aviation, reinforced over decades by the official position that UAPs are misidentifications, creates strong disincentives against reporting. Pilots who report are sometimes subjected to psychological evaluation. Encounters are sometimes removed from official records. The professional cost of reporting is real. Ryan Graves, who testified before the House Oversight Committee in 2023, described this dilemma directly. His squadron had been encountering unidentified objects in restricted military airspace off the Virginia coast on a near-daily basis in 2014 and 2015. The objects were detected by the radar system upgrades the F/A-18 squadrons had just received, upgrades that made previously undetected objects visible. The encounters were happening regularly enough that pilots discussed them routinely among themselves. Graves describes the official response as indifferent at best. Pilots who filed reports were not followed up with. The encounters continued. The attitude he describes from the chain of command was essentially, "This is not something we are going to address." He describes knowing other pilots who had encounters but would not report them because of the professional consequences. The suppression of reporting was not official policy. It was the predictable outcome of a cultural environment in which reporting was associated with professional risk. This is a specific, documented description of how potentially significant aerospace safety information is lost because the institutional culture has been organized over decades to discourage reporting rather than to collect it. The physical evidence dimension of UAP cases is the weakest part of the public record, and being honest about that matters for assessing where the overall evidence stands. The Nimitz case has authenticated video from military sensor systems and multiple consistent witness accounts. That is strong evidence. It does not include physical material recovered from the object. The Rendlesham case has Holt's contemporaneous audio recording, his memorandum, and multiple witness accounts. The radiation measurements at the landing site are documented. Physical analysis of the site was conducted. That is reasonably strong evidence of a real event. It does not include material from the craft. Grush's testimony claimed that physical materials, including craft and biological specimens, exist in government possession. This is the most extraordinary physical evidence claim in the public record. It is testimony from a credible source under oath. It has not been confirmed by independent examination of the claimed materials. The gap between authenticated sensor data showing unexplained aerial phenomena and recovered craft and biological specimens is significant. The first category is established by the public record. The second is claimed by a credible source whose claim has not been independently verified. Both are worth knowing about. They should not be treated as equivalent evidence. The physical evidence that would be most significant, actual material from one of the documented objects, is not in the public domain. Whether it exists at all, and in whose possession, is the question that Grush's testimony raises without resolving. The broader context of government secrecy programs is relevant for understanding the plausibility of claims about long-running classified programs related to UAPs. The United States government has maintained genuinely secret programs for decades in other domains. The Manhattan Project remained unknown to most of Congress until after the first atomic bomb was used. The U-2 reconnaissance aircraft program was classified for years. The existence of the National Security Agency was not officially acknowledged until the 1970s. The full scope of CIA activities in the Cold War era was not known even to most officials with relevant clearances. These precedents establish that long-running, expensive, highly consequential programs can be maintained in genuine secrecy within the U.S. government. The claim that UAP-related programs have been similarly compartmentalized is not inherently implausible given this history. What the history of other secret programs also shows is that most of them were eventually disclosed through congressional investigations, journalistic investigation, declassification, or whistleblowers. The Manhattan Project, the U-2, the NSA's existence all became public eventually. The programs Grush describes have not been disclosed at the level of detail that comparable programs eventually were. This could mean they do not exist as described. It could mean they are more successfully protected than most comparable programs. It could mean the disclosure process is incomplete. The precedents from other secret programs do not resolve the question. They demonstrate that the question is not inherently implausible. The contribution that Knapp's work makes, taken as a whole, is best understood as this. He has maintained the public record on a subject that institutional science and institutional journalism have largely abandoned. The specific cases he has documented, the Lazar story, the UAP disclosure, the Skinwalker Ranch investigation, the dozens of witness interviews accumulated over decades, constitute a record that is more carefully assembled than anything else available. That record has limits. It is a journalistic record, not a scientific one. Its strongest components are the multiply-confirmed military cases, where sensor data backs witness accounts. Its weaker components are the source-reported claims about classified program content that cannot be independently verified. Both components are worth engaging with seriously at the evidentiary level they actually occupy. The evidence from the documented military cases, Nimitz, Rendlesham, Tehran, O'Hare, JAL 1628, is strong enough to establish that genuinely unexplained aerial phenomena occur regularly and are documented by credible witnesses and sensor systems. The evidence for what those phenomena are, their origin, their operators if they have operators, their relationship to anything else discussed in this series, is not established by the available public record. That is the honest state of what Knapp's 35 years of work has built. Real, carefully documented evidence that something unexplained is occurring. No resolution of what that something is. The investigation that would produce that resolution has not been conducted at the level the evidence warrants by the institutions with the resources to conduct it. That gap between warranted and conducted is real. It has real consequences for the pilots who encounter these phenomena without institutional support for understanding what they saw, for the researchers who work without access to the classified data that might clarify the picture, for the public that is making decisions about the world without the information that the documented evidence suggests should be part of that picture. George Knapp has spent 35 years trying to close that gap. He has made it smaller. It remains open. The documented cases in this episode share a characteristic worth naming directly. None of them has been explained, not by the governments that investigated them, not by independent researchers, not by skeptics applying conventional explanations. The core anomalous elements in each case remain unaccounted for by any explanation that has been seriously proposed. The honest position is that these are genuine anomalies, documented by credible people using credible methodology. Conventional explanations do not account for them. Extraordinary explanations have not been established. That is what unexplained means. Not proof of something extraordinary. Not a hidden conventional explanation waiting to be found. Genuinely not explained by what is currently known. Holding that position honestly is what the material requires. Knapp has held it for 35 years. The subject deserves that kind of intellectual honesty from everyone who engages with it.